Modern submarines, they mark the pinnacle of naval engineering. Until very recently, few realized that President Lincoln had a secret Civil War submarine known as the Alligator, with technologies used in subs today. The Civil War prompted an arms race, and submarines were the state of the art. Recently discovered blueprints of the Alligator reveal advances so intriguing it has caught the attention of the Navy. Now trying to rediscover the Union sub's pioneering technologies. A unique streamlined hull, an innovative air purification system, a diver lockout chamber, and more. But all this was lost in 1863 when Alligator went down during a hurricane. Today, there's a storm of interest in the U.S. Navy's first underwater fighting vehicle, and a search is underway to find it, along with secrets it still holds. Somewhere in these waters rests a relic of the first modern arms race, a Civil War submarine named the Alligator. Few historians know of its existence, but the U.S. Navy and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration are determined to recover it and learn the secrets of America's earliest fighting sub. In its day, it had no rival. It was bigger, faster, and more sophisticated than any underwater craft. That's why the Navy wants to find it.
Everybody likes a good mystery story. Before the Titanic was located, I think it had the same kind of enthusiasm of wanting to find it, wanting to see what the condition was. We don't know exactly how quickly it flooded. We don't know how quickly it sank. And so we've mapped out a fairly broad area on a chart where we think is the highest probability where the Alligator's sitting on the bottom.
These old subs are just waiting to be discovered. The most recent and successful find was the Confederate sub Hunley. In the spring of 2004, the South rose again, and time marched backward in homage to the Hunley. Thousands of reenactors took to the streets and took to heart a time past in Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston newspaper reporter Brian Hicks stands at the spot where Hunley embarked. He's written a book about this famous sub. The North had a plan, Brian says. A plan that was as simple as it was grand. Choke and starve the Confederacy.
The blockade of the southern coast was an ingenious part of the Union's war strategy. They cut off all of their supply lines, and the southern cities were literally starving. It was a massive undertaking. The U.S. Navy blockaded thousands of miles of coast from Virginia all the way around to Texas.
The South had no navy to speak of. In desperation, the Confederates turned to technology, launching heavily armored steam-powered ships with large movable cannon. These were the ironclads. The Confederacy built the impregnable CSS Virginia, better known as the Merrimack. The North replied with its own iron monster, the Monitor. No wood-hulled sailing ship was safe from their iron fists. Early duels between the ironclads ended in dents, So both sides vied for new technologies, hoping to win control over the South's crucial ports. There was only one answer left: stealth, a torpedo boat that could attack from beneath the surface. A group of industrialists led by Horace Hunley set about building a 40-foot, 8-man submarine they named the Hunley. Off its bow, an explosive harpoon they called a torpedo. It would be rammed into a ship's wooden hull. The Hunley would then back away, detonating it. But there were grim problems. Twice during training, the boat flooded, killing the crew, Horace Hunley among them. Finally, on a wintry night in February 1864, the Hunley, under the command of Lieutenant George Dixon, set out from shore once more. Eight brave men risking their lives to attack the 1,240-ton Housatonic, 5 times their size. The Hunley's harpoon drove into the wooden hull. An explosion lit off the gunboat's magazine, sending the blockade vessel down. It was the first successful attack by a submarine. But the Hunley never returned from battle and was never seen again. In 1995, the Hunley was finally found. Long, painstaking efforts followed to safely raise her, along with her honored dead. Archaeologists and preservationists worked tirelessly to preserve the unique historic vessel and sunken tomb, sparking new interest in the subs of the Civil War. But while the Hunley submarine now has its place in history, few know that it had a predecessor in the North. A year before the Hunley went to sea, the North was developing its own infernal machine to join the war. The hunt for this little-known boat, called Alligator, began by chance. Rear Admiral J. Cohen's wife showed him an article in America's Civil War magazine. The Admiral directs the Office of Naval Research.
I was very familiar with the Confederate ship, the Hunley, which had recently been found and raised and now is in the process of restoration. So we started to do a search and found out that there were a few, very few articles about the Alligator, but really not a lot had been written about it.
The residents of Philadelphia were shocked one evening in May 1861 when a strange machine ran itself aground in the Delaware River. These were dangerous times. Police rushed to capture it, and rumors spread.
Never, since the first flush of the news of the bombardment of Fort Sumter, has there been an excitement in the city equal to the capture of a mysterious vessel which was said to be an infernal machine.
During the Civil War era, sneak attacks at sea were considered cowardly and uncivilized. So a war machine attacking from beneath the waves was denounced as an infernal machine, the devil's handiwork.
The Philadelphia police saw this monster, as they called it, arrested him, thinking he was an 1861 terrorist, and it got the Navy's interest.
This infernal machine was a 32-foot submarine built for salvage operations by a French inventor named Brutus de Villeroy. So little is known of him that so far no picture of him has been uncovered.
Brutus de Villeroy was absolutely a fascinating individual. De Villeroy was experimenting with submersibles off of France. He had offered to the French Navy at the time a submarine design, and the French Navy found reasons not to accept his design. He thought by coming to America, he might find a more receptive clientele.
The local police sent de Villeroy's infernal machine to the Naval Yard for inspection. The Navy was impressed.
There was an arms race going on. There was a desire to have this innovation. De Villarreal went ahead and, I think, responded to that.
De Villeroy was eager to sell his invention and even wrote directly to President Abraham Lincoln. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles proceeded to commission an iron submarine propeller of the plan of Mr. de Villeroy for the sum of $14,000, $250,000 in today's currency. And if they succeeded in sinking an enemy ship, de Villeroy would get the astounding bounty of $86,000, nearly $1.5 million today. But what happened to the submarine, and who was Brutus de Villeroy? The search began in France. Catherine Marzan of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration traveled to Paris in search of de Villeroy's legacy.
We didn't know anything about him, other than he had come to Philadelphia before 1860. In the 1860 census, he was asked not only what was his name, his age, but also his occupation, and he answered the fact that he was a natural genius.
Catherine's quest led her to a 17th century castle on the outskirts of Paris, once home of King Louis XIV, now home to the French Naval Archives.
I called the Naval Archive, the Service Historique de la Marine, and I asked for information on a personal file on Brutus de Villeroy. And they asked me to call back in 2 hours.
If there were any traces of de Villeroy and his infernal machine, archivist Alexander Dubois would unearth them.
I was surprised, especially I was surprised to learn that there was no blueprints of the Alligator in the United States.
I really didn't come to France thinking that I would find, if anything, I would find maybe a little bit on Brutus de Villeroy. Maybe hear about where he went to school, maybe hear if he had children. But what I found was all of the communications between the French government and Brutus de Villeroy that had to do with submarine designs. C'est en fait un peu la description de ce qu'on prenait de l'Alligator, c'est qu'avant il y avait des rames. I was quite surprised to be able to touch history and see these original and feel the paper and look at the ink and then read these letters. It was quite exciting and I couldn't believe it. Avec plusieurs hommes en même temps.
In the case of Villeroy, he was not underestimated. His inventions were studied by the Council of Works in between 1832 and 1835. They wanted something which would be practical to lay a mine under a ship or to collect an object on the seafloor. The submarine which was proposed by Brutus de Villeroy didn't meet the requirement.
In 1832, de Villeroy demonstrated his first submarine near his home in Nantes, southwest of Paris.
He had invited all of the establishment of the city and made quite an impression to the local population.
These illustrations, recently uncovered, are the first evidence of de Villeroy's early submarine, a three-man craft with paddles for propulsion. As fate would have it, Nantes was also home to future author Jules Verne, then just 4 years old. There's even speculation that de Villeroy actually taught Verne mathematics, and that the budding writer's inspiration for his masterpiece, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, came from de Villeroy's early experiments with subs. The Jules Verne Museum in Nantes documents his life and work. Jules Verne, one of the great fiction writers of all time, was a scientific visionary, conjuring up flying machines, rocket ships, and submarines well before their time. Agnes Marceteau, the museum's director, is a scholar who's studied and written about Jules Verne.
Alors écoutez, on considère en fait que sa jeunesse à Nantes est totalement fondatrice.
Growing up in Nantes is considered to be the foundation for Jules Verne's work, since at the time, Nantes was a very large commercial harbor.
Et en plus, il enseignait.
Villeroy taught in the schools that Jules Verne went to.
Alors, en l'état actuel,
with the existing research and pending further checking, it seems that family traditions report that Jules Verne was a student of Villeroy.
Though their direct connection may never fully be known, Brutus de Villeroy and Jules Verne were visionaries who sought the future in the ocean's depths.
Whether he was a teacher of Jules Verne doesn't take away from the fact that probably Villeroy's submarine design was known by Jules Verne and was one of the inspirations in writing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Nemo's Nautilus.
Based on Catherine's discovery of Alligator's blueprints, experts in the U.S. are working to visualize the technology of President Lincoln's secret sub. Among them, Jim Chrisley, a retired Navy Chief Petty Officer.
Whenever you draw something or build something, a model of something, or try to build a full-size thing, you start to learn a lot about it. One of the things that we had for a long time was we didn't know what it looked like exactly. We knew what other artists pictured it as. So I tried to reverse engineer how did they actually build this idea for which we have the drawings and the written descriptions. Does this thing that we're looking at make sense? How does it work?
Chrisley found that by 1860, ironworkers had mastered the techniques for bending steel and forging rivets to make steam boilers. This same technology could be applied to build submarines. De Villeroy designed the Alligator to be a 46-foot submarine propelled by a system of 18 hand-pulled oars. Jim Chrisley was so intrigued, he dug into his toolbox.
One of the things that we didn't clearly understand is how the oars work. So I built this to better understand that. The oar penetrates through the pressure hull, this being this section of the hull. And on the propulsion stroke, the oar would be open like this, and then to create less resistance on the return stroke, the oar would fold up on the return stroke, and then the water would open it up again on the propulsion stroke. You read the letters, you read the documents, you read about the problems. I think some of the things and some of the thought processes that these people had are the same thought processes and the same kind of talent and dedication to what they do that submarine sailors have today.
This is a legacy that began with the USS Holland, the Navy's first commissioned sub, put in service in 1900. But the earliest subs go back hundreds of years more, before the word for submarine entered the language. In 1776, the colonies built the Turtle to help fight the Revolutionary War. It attempted a mission, but never succeeded. Robert Fulton, inventor of the steam engine, built the Nautilus for the French Emperor Napoleon in 1800, which was finally rejected. It was the Civil War where subs as weapons truly began. Of the dozen or so subs built during the Civil War, few remain today, and most of those are rusting hulks. But one Civil War sub, with a peculiar name, the Intelligent Whale, exists in near mint condition. Built in 1864 and housed at the New Jersey National Guard Museum, the Intelligent Whale was one of 12 known designs presented to the Union Navy during the Civil War. And apart from Alligator, it was the only other one built. Doug Almack wrote his master's thesis about it.
The Intelligent Whale weighed over 40,000 pounds. We know it was made of 46 plates of wrought iron or boiler iron. This is the interior of the Intelligent Whale. This is where they entered through the top hatch, and the crew, numbering 3 or 4, would position themselves at a specific station. 2 sailors would operate the hand crank, and a captain would sit here, and a diver would be stationed somewhere else. The 2 sailors would push this hand crank. If they pushed it one direction, that would propel the submarine forward. If they pushed it another way, it would propel it backward. This is where the captain would position himself. He would be sitting on a raised steersman stool, and his head would actually go up here in this small conning tower.
the Navy contracted de Villeroy to build his 20-man sub at the Neffie and Levy shipyard in Philadelphia. Incredibly, the contract required delivery of the completed sub in 40 days. Unfortunately, there were numerous delays. Disagreements between the shipyard and de Villeroy grew intolerable for de Villeroy. He walked off the job, and he walked off the map of history as well, never to be heard from again. In May of 1862, de Villeroy's sub was launched. It had been painted green and soon took on a nickname it would keep forever: Alligator. Alligator was put under the supervision of Samuel Akins. Relatives still have the original commissioning letter signed by Navy Secretary Gideon Wells. It is said that an early sea trial in Washington's Anacostia River was observed by President Lincoln himself. The first job for Lincoln's secret sub was to clear southern rivers. The South had planted obstacles to sabotage northern warships. There were mines, sunken hulls, old bridge work, and underwater traps. Alligator's divers could sneak into the battle zone and clear the traps, or mark them for safer navigation. Author and diver Mark Reagan built his own mini-sub. His undersea interests led him to become the Hunley Project historian, helping with its recovery and writing a book about the Confederate sub. He says that North and South employ totally different tactics with their new underwater weapons systems.
Confederate subs are pretty much what we use the submarine today, is to go out and attack vessels that are out on the ocean. The northern idea was to go into a harbor, sneak into a defended harbor, and get rid of the underwater obstructions.
The Alligator was instructed to attack vessels stationed at Norfolk. Its primary target was the CSS Virginia, commonly known as the Merrimack.
Some thought that the idea of an iron ship was insane, and others thought that this was a very innovative weapon that had to be gotten rid of as fast as possible.
But before the Alligator arrived for battle, the Merrimack was scuttled and blown up, and the Alligator found itself in the teeth of a vicious land-sea confrontation known as the 7 Days Battle. The North assembled 100,000 troops against the South. But instead of following President Lincoln's orders to attack, General McClellan bumbled, wavered, and fell back, losing tens of thousands dead.
And here the Alligator was out in the river, literally within earshot of Valdez. We've got several dispatches from the Union commanders from the fleet that's out in the James River at the time saying that the rebels know this thing is here. And if we don't send it back, they could capture it. And to us, it's basically useless because we're in a river and we don't have time to deploy a submarine. But in the hands of the rebels, they could take this thing away from us and it could be devastating to our side.
The Union quickly towed the sub out of range to safety. This was the first United States submarine actually in an active combat zone.
Well, after the Alligator's unsuccessful voyage up the James River, it was sent to the Washington Navy Yard. After the tests in the Anacostia River, they determined these opening and closing paddles just were useless in any sort of a current. Then that's when they decided to change to a propeller. So it was dry docked and the propeller was cast in Philadelphia and it was finally put on.
Nearly a century and a half later, propellers are still used even on the most advanced subs. In October 2004, the United States Navy celebrated its newest class of submarine with the commissioning of the USS Virginia at the Norfolk Naval Station. The hull number 774 represents the Navy's 774th sub to be ordered. This new Virginia is also a technological marvel. Nuclear-powered, 377 feet long, 7,000 tons, crewed by 113 sailors with an arsenal of torpedoes, missiles, and mines. But before the USS Virginia was built, her design was tested at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Carteret, Maryland. This is the largest tank test facility of its kind in the world. It's also highly secretive. Its biggest tank is larger than a football field. It can generate waves that top 4 feet, the equal of 40-foot seas. Sam Cubbage directs the facility's free-running submarine model testing.
It's very important to understand the maneuvering performance of the ships and submarines at various points in the design process in order to know whether your new design, whether it's going to do what you expect it to do. In the submarine world, we test all submarine designs here. This is an Ohio-class model. It's approximately 1/20th scale. We collect up to 500 channels of data, from ship velocities to the forces and moments on the control surfaces. Our rate of control models are on the order of about $1 million to start from scratch to build one up full. It's exciting from the aspect of what we're doing for the fleet. It's also exciting because every day is something new. There's some wonderful facilities here that you can't find anywhere else in the world.
A perfect place to test Alligator's Civil War technologies. Science Channel commissioned expert submodeler David Merriman to build a 1/12 scale radio-controlled working model from de Villeroy's original plans.
Props forward, reverse, left rudder, port and starboard seems to be working perfect.
The Surface Warfare Center opened their secret facility for testing, and Science Channel was given special access to document the results. In the water, the Alligator quickly yielded its century-old secrets. The strange system of floating ballast tanks turned out to have 2 jobs. They not only controlled the Alligator's depth, they created stability in currents.
I was very intrigued by the idea of the Alligator coming here to look at it. It was interesting to look at the design of it and to see what they were doing back in 1860 and how close it was to what we were doing here. Maybe learn something that they might have known back then that maybe we've overlooked by now.
Modeler David Merriman and the test basin engineers agree that de Villeroy got the basics right.
Well, it's got about the right hull length to width ratio. No, the inventor was not far off the mark. It strikes me as a practical submarine.
One thing that really struck me about the design was the lack of vertical control surfaces, the lack of any sort of fins back here like the rudders to control yourself and rise and dive.
In their absence, I was skeptical when I first operated this. I thought it was going to be all over the place. It was surprisingly stable. One other thing is when these deploy, they not only permit penetration of the water and a variable buoyant force, but they also raise the metacentric height. Either by fortunate accident or by design, the inventor came up with a very stable boat that did not require horizontal control surfaces.
With this type of a bluff-shaped afterbody, we expect a region of turbulent, chaotic flow back here, and that tends to degrade the effectiveness of these rudders as lifting surfaces to control the boat. Probably would not be as responsive or as agile as a modern submarine. But in terms of being able to generate a steady turning diameter, very comparable to a modern submarine.
Modern submarines share another trait pioneered by Alligator, the diver lockout.
The principal form of attack was to deploy a diver, and that of course required a lockout facility within the submarine, what we would call a lockout chamber. The diver would enter the lockout chamber, flood it down enough to get the hatch wet. Prior to this, he would undog the door. Once he'd equalized, the door would open up, and then he could step right into the sea.
His air supply was hand-pumped into his helmet.
It's a very interesting design because a lockout chamber is something that's a common feature on modern submarines. Maybe he was seeing into the future to see the future use of divers, but it seems like a very interesting thing to put on a submarine at the time.
Today, Navy SEALs use mini-subs about the size of Alligator, launched from attack subs, to sneak special operations teams close into shore. De Villeroy's insights impressed the modern Navy, but Alligator had an even bigger secret: its air purification and renewal system. Plans describe a cylindrical blower, chemicals, pulleys, and bowls. The Navy speculated that de Villeroy's technique worked by forcing air in the boat through lime water, which removed carbon dioxide. One diagram from the period illustrates purifying air by passing it through hand-cranked cotton cloth impregnated with lime water. But Alligator's exact technique is yet to be discovered. To test whether air purification with lime actually works, we traveled to the U.S. Navy submarine base in Groton, Connecticut. It's home to 14 modern attack subs and the Navy's only submarine medical research lab. Commander Wayne Horn, Senior Undersea Medical Officer, takes the Science Channel cameras aboard the Navy's first nuclear submarine. Today, the Nautilus serves to train future submariners. He demonstrates a survival technique developed in his lab and used aboard all Navy subs today. If a sub loses electricity, the carbon dioxide we breathe out eventually becomes deadly poison. The solution are these curtains filled with a chemical called lithium hydroxide that passively scrubs the CO2 out of the air.
This is absolutely life critical. Without good carbon dioxide scrubbing in a crowded submarine that was disabled, it's the absolute key to survival. At high levels, carbon dioxide buildup is fatal. Certainly beyond 10% can incapacitate an entire crew and make rescue impossible, as well as ultimately leading to death. These canister curtain assemblies can absorb the carbon dioxide production of 2 men over a period of 1 day. So you're looking at several hundred of these, 300 or 400, to actually have a 7-day survivability if you had a sunken submarine that had no power.
It turns out that lithium hydroxide is not much different from a mineral common during the Civil War. Lime was everywhere, abundant. Commander Horn says the Alligator could well have used it. At the submarine medical lab, lime granules are crushed into powder, then mixed with water into a solution.
Lime water was readily available in that area. The lime was used to make soap. It was a commonly known chemical at the time, and certainly the carbon dioxide absorbing properties were known. You can turn the carbon dioxide on.
Carbon dioxide at levels dangerous to humans is pumped through the lime water to see how effectively the lime can absorb the CO2.
That's good. The carbon dioxide is being well absorbed by the solution, and we have a current reading of a little over 1/2 of 1%.
This proves that a simple lime water solution is effective in scrubbing carbon dioxide, and some variation on this was probably Alligator's secret for purifying its air.
The surprising thing about the Alligator is how they demonstrated during the Civil War era a surprising ingenuity to make a submarine a practical warfighting weapon.
Alligator's design seemed viable, and Commander Horn has shown that air purification was possible. So what became of Alligator after her refit at the Washington Naval Yard? Soon after Alligator's oars were replaced by a hand-cranked screw propeller and successful sea trials completed, orders came to head south, where it would assist in the siege of Charleston. In early April 1863, the steamship USS Sumter took Alligator in tow for Port Royal, South Carolina. While steaming off the Outer Banks of North Carolina, nicknamed Graveyard of the Atlantic for all the ships that have foundered here, a raging hurricane blew up. Sumter was having trouble making way with the 35-ton Alligator in tow. During the storm, 2 of Sumter's crew were washed overboard and lost. With no one aboard Alligator, the order was given to cut her loose. At some point during the storm, she sank. No one knows if she sank quickly or drifted off into the Gulf Stream, possibly sinking into the abyss off the continental shelf. All that's known is that when the Sumter returned to sea after the storm to retrieve the sub, Alligator was never seen again. Now, 142 years after it disappeared, an expedition to find Alligator's final resting place. The Office of Naval Research ship YP-679, with Navy and NOAA researchers aboard, departs Ocracoke, North Carolina, to search the seafloor. From the estimated position, marked by a star, where Sumter cut Alligator loose, a search radius of 8,000 square miles is created southeast of Cape Hatteras. This expedition will survey a small block within it.
So we're going out, we're riding this way.
Chief Scientist Michael Overfield is a marine archaeologist for NOAA. He's faced problems like this before.
There are so many complexities that are involved in analyzing these historic records. If the Alligator was sunk right away, she may be within this 625 square nautical mile area. If she had drifted for 6, 8, 12, 24 hours, she could be caught up in the Gulf Stream and floated for a long period of time, which would make the search almost impossible. We're searching approximately 50 square nautical miles of that survey block, 25 nautical miles off the coast of Ocracoke.
Another partner in the hunt is East Carolina University. They are providing the magnetometer and side-scan sonar search tools.
Neutral now, over.
Staff and students from their underwater archaeology department are aboard to help operate gear.
Bridge, all ahead slow.
Called a towfish, the side-scan sonar bounces an acoustic signal off the sea floor. The ship drives the towfish back and forth over the bottom in a pattern called mowing the line. If the sonar hits a target, shipboard monitors will record it.
We're looking out 100 meters on each side of the towfish, but that also includes the water column. So we're really looking out about 80 meters on each side at this point. And it's nice clear bottom. There are really no features down there other than sand.
If there was a target laying on the bottom, it would stand out in this environment.
They find a sunken barge, but not the Alligator. The towed magnetometer measures the magnetic field generated by iron. It can detect steel-hulled shipwrecks buried below the sand and invisible to sonar, divers, or other submersibles. On their monitors, a magnetic object appears as a spike.
It's the anticipation of watching that target or hoping that it appears just on the next frame, just on the next line that comes across. Even though we looked at 15 hours of just sand on the bottom, Each minute, each second that rolled by, we were just hoping for a glimpse. That time period is, but if he's going...
For Dan Basta, NOAA's Director of National Marine Sanctuaries and co-sponsor of the project, the hunt for alligator is much more than a shipwreck adventure.
The alligator is an important national asset. What it does for NOAA is it allows us to capture the nation's attention on things that are maritime heritage, that are marine science, that are conservation. It's a mystery. It's historic. It's Civil War. It's Abe Lincoln. It's Jules Verne's. It's lost at sea. It's technology. It's unknown. How do you educate kids about science when you can't get their attention? And the alligator has proven it to be something that interests them tremendously.
"5 days of searching, punctuated by a couple of days with stormy seas that kept them in port. 16 miles of seafloor were surveyed. A few sonar contacts were made, but no alligator. No one expected that finding alligator would be easy. It may take years of searching, but with sophisticated new deep-sea probes, the hunt will continue."
Naval research is interested not only from the naval history point of view, but in today's world, there are many threats to our Navy in the littorals, on the bottom, whether it's mines, submarines, sensors. And we need to develop the capability to find those enemy devices. If we can find alligator, we can find anything.
The most advanced submarine ever built up to this time was the Alligator. It's finally being brought to the American public's attention, and it should be. It really deserves its place in history.
Villeroy was never recognized in France. He's one of those famous unknown inventors among many to sell an invention to the French and was rejected. But his persistence paid off because he did build a submarine for a navy. It just wasn't the French Navy, it was the United States, the Union Navy.
It's not rewriting history, it's just adding an important chapter to the long history of the United States Navy, especially during the Civil War, and an important insight into the role of submarines in naval warfare.
In some ways, alligator has already been found. It has been found in the French Navy archives. It has been rediscovered in the public's imagination, and it has revealed insightful and innovative technologies. Though the alligator still waits to be recovered, the lost underwater hunter has taken its place in history, recognized for all time as the U.S. Navy's first submarine.